Hello, good morning, and welcome to our special Sunday edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's. This morning, Labour is tearing itself apart in public over Keir Starmer's future, holding its breath for the PM's big recovery speech tomorrow. Can one moment, one speech, really turn it around? My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Keir Starmer will face a leadership challenge tomorrow morning from a little-known backbencher unless the cabinet lock themselves in a room in the next day or so to work out a successor. That's the challenge from Catherine West, the Australian-born North London MP who came out of the blocks yesterday to announce she, if nobody else, would challenge the PM. At the time of speaking, the cabinet en masse is saying, no, we won't meet today, although they're talking behind the scenes in small groups, as still nobody at Labour's top table appears willing to put their head above the parapet and say what a lot of other people in Labour are saying, and the Prime Minister must go. But they're talking and they don't know what's going to happen next. And increasingly, they're telling me they think there is a good chance this whole thing could spiral into chaos within days.
After 24 Labour MPs called for Keir Starmer to set out a timetable to go in the aftermath of Thursday's elections disaster, West, the MP for Hornsey and Free and Barnet, smashed through the polite conversation in the party. And she talked on Trevor Phillips this morning, Sam, about inertia. And she has stunned Labour by saying that won't do. So issued her challenge 5 p.m. on Saturday. She will challenge herself for the leadership if the cabinet doesn't get its act together and act.
There is now, in the form of West, a voice from the backbenchers challenging the cabinet, and she is calling them a disgrace for not meeting and trying to work out a strategy of what to do next. So if they continue to ignore West and people that agree with her, the question tomorrow will be, do MPs fall in behind Catherine West, who says she's got 10 people backing her, and help her get to the 81 that will formally start a leadership challenge?
Now, Catherine West was a minister in the Foreign Office. She lost her job last year, but she's also the MP who kicked off Partygate against Boris Johnson. So she does have a reputation as a bit of a Prime Minister slayer. She said this morning that she would listen to the Prime Minister tomorrow. She said she would listen fairly and then decide whether to trigger her process in the afternoon. But it looks a bit like a foregone conclusion. Does it really depend on whether she gets in the end to that 81 signatories number? Or is it, as someone said, a bit of a palate cleanser that just says, here is a woman who's coming out. She's speaking truth to power. Labour knows it in its guts. Keir Starmer can't do it. Is that really her function here?
Yeah, I think she's trying to shake a party out of the complacency and out of the kind of more normal, more regular way of responding to bad news and actually get them to do something. She's a stalking horse, I suppose that's the term that we would use, because she's got no chance, I think it's fair to say, of becoming Prime Minister herself. She has a preference, and she made that clear on Trevor Phillips this morning, that she'd like a prominent female candidate to be in the mix. Could that be Angela Rayner? Could that be somebody else? But her intervention is much more about trying to force a conversation that too many in Labour want to avoid. It strikes me, Anne, that right now, many in Labour seem to be overcomplicating the issue. They are backing or not backing her call based on whether or not it helps or hurts their preferred candidate. And while everyone seems to be saying they're going to wait for Keir Starmer's big speech tomorrow, few inside the cabinet and outside the cabinet think that speech, as you were just saying, will change anything. So there's a big choice in the next 36 hours for almost every Labour MP to make.
There is a big choice, and there's also a big conundrum, isn't there? Catherine West calling for a contest straight away. But we know, we've discussed it a lot on the podcast, different contenders in very differing states of readiness or hurdles to coming back into the fray and challenging Keir Starmer. So Andy Burnham, not even in Parliament. This could be the moment perhaps when Keir Starmer makes clear that he would not block a Burnham return, but all of that can be strung out to take some time. Then you have a lot of his allies not happy, I think, Lou Hague, etc., that Catherine West has gone off and done her own thing. It's also tricky, though, for Angela Rayner. Now, did you notice, Sam, at the end of Trevor's interview with West, that when she was asked who she wanted, she basically said, I would like a woman. She wanted the women MPs to get together, get their act together. That sounded, given the dearth of others who would be ready or willing, like an appeal for Angela Rayner. But Rayner's tax affairs are not yet sorted. Although, you know what, I'm thinking this is now gone to it's gone to the next level, all of this. Given that they're likely to be sorted, is that holding back Rayner as much as it once did? Just an interesting question for you there. But Wes Streeting, well, everyone seemed poised today. This morning I was talking to, is this his day to make a move? But it is possible to overthink this and to expect Wes Streeting to make a move. He may decide that his interests are best served by waiting it out, and he will not want to do that unless he feels that he has been able to resolve some of the tensions about him and whether he's to the left or right of the party. Is he entirely ready either? And then we just had one little noise off this morning as we were sitting down to record, which is a new intake MP, high flyer, had a bit of an Icarus moment. Josh Simons, who resigned over the Labour Together scandal, has called for the PM to quit. Well, you could say damaged goods, but just the voice in which he does so sounds like it speaks for the younger generation of Labour MPs. Will they follow him? Will they not?
My goodness, Josh Simons. Look, I know he left government recently under a cloud, but barely 2 years ago, he was the actual literal head of Keir Starmer's Praetorian army. So I looked at his name and I did wonder whether the dam was starting to break. Look, let me set out where I think we are, because I think the chance of something happening now is quite high. You are seeing this morning, and we're recording this just before 11 on Sunday morning, you're seeing inertia from the top table, from the cabinet table. And I think part of that is because there is no good answer of what to do. You know, for all of the candidates that we're talking about, no options really definitely work for sure and put Labour on a course to victory at the next election. So different people are clinging on to the least worst scenarios, but also in the cabinet, quite blatantly, is that they are thinking about themselves and their futures. There's an element of selfishness in the cabinet, I think, here. And that very appearance of selfish inertia, because of the self-interest that they're displaying, is just going to rile up the many, many Labour MPs more. There are 403 Labour MPs. You need to get to 81 for a tipping point. And whether or not that's in or out of a process, 81 MPs calling for Keir Starmer to go, I think will be a psychologically massive moment if it happened. And we've all, you know, Sky, amongst others, have got their kind of counters and their kind of tickers, looking at spreadsheets, looking at where that number is, and we'll take stock of that tomorrow morning. But some in the cabinet are looking at Wes and wondering whether he'll act today. But at time of speaking, Team Wes Streeting tell me very firmly, no, he isn't going to do anything today. He isn't going to do anything before the speech. He's going to let Keir Starmer set out his stall, and he's not going to challenge him. That still remains his plan. He's not going to actually due out in public until NHS stats are released on Thursday. Angela Rayner's team, they are also silent. But I'm told different cabinet factions have been talking to one another in the last 24 hours. And many of them just want the West challenge to go away because they sense that might not be able. But and here's the big but. What I'm picking up from different wings of cabinet is that they think that they now might not be able to hold back the tide. So they don't like the West stuff, but there is, as of Sunday morning, a growing recognition that this might suddenly become unstoppable for all the public statements. So 2 quick quotes for you. One cabinet source told me they think it's 60-40 we tumble into a disorderly contest in the next few days. Another said, I appreciate these things can spiral, and this is clearly a moment of danger for Keir Starmer, especially if, as I assume is the case, the speech tomorrow is underwhelming.
Wow. And to me, what stands out there is as I assume, the speech tomorrow is underwhelming. I mean, Doesn't that just say it all? I mean, you've got the inertia charge, which I think, whatever the weaknesses and slightly the kind of one-woman show at the moment of Catherine West, she has put her finger on this very, very sore spot. Inertia, complacency. You're not really hearing how much the country is angry, how much a lot of Labour councillors who've lost their seats are absolutely furious with this default mode of, well, just give us some more time and we'll do the same things. And then over time, this will work out and you'll see that we were right or that we were on the right course and that isn't cutting it. I think that's one thing. But the other thing in your great quote there, I'm sure you're not going to tell us who it is, but this is a very senior person just assuming that when the Prime Minister gives a reset speech, it's going to be underwhelming. So that could be, on the Wes Streeting analysis, that could be the plank that the Prime Minister walks by himself without needing Wes at this point to take the risk and come out. We know that would be divisive and that it would also have the effect of probably bringing out Angela Rayner as well. And then you'd be, what was that nice quote? Tumbling into a disorderly contest, to which one could say, if this is order, how much more disorderly can it get? But admittedly, getting rid of the Prime Minister is that. So how does Keir Starmer approach this speech, Sam? I suppose from his point of view, I think he has to get over a difficulty I felt in his communications on Friday and a bit in the Observer interview with Rachel Sylvester. I said he wanted 10 years. You know, why? Because it's all going so great. Is that this grit, this stubbornness is beginning to sound like hubris. And I think that must be worrying Cabinet as well. And then how does he use this moving closer to the EU, which let's talk about whether that's sensible positioning in a moment. But even if we think it is, what's he got new to say? I mean, I've done a lot of these interviews, as you know, I've subjected you to them. This kind of reconnection is very difficult and is taking a long time. And there is not yet great confidence in a very positive outcome that is in concrete terms.
Absolutely. What can Keir Starmer say without a mandate from a new manifesto, without a big shift in policy terms that doesn't breach red lines that he's set out before? Look, we're told that he's going to be a bit more pro-EU, but the single market customs unions red lines absolutely seem to be staying. And there are all the difficulties, you know, how much money we're going to have to pay into the pot for no control over regulation. That's debate that we've had before. Some, interestingly, Anne, I'm told some cabinet teams, including the Home Office, don't appear to have been particularly consulted over this. So that might suggest that there isn't a big move being made on Shabana Mahmood's migration plans, which are the target of a lot of the anger of the soft left. But some teams, like Wes Streeting's, do seem to be consulted about tomorrow's speech. So could there be a bit of a tweak around around health policy? But there's no cabinet meeting before the speech that he's given in a way that you would do if there was a big substantial change in the way that the government was going about things. So again, can this really be in this format a big change of direction? It doesn't feel like that. Could I just broaden out this debate, sort of introduce a sort of slightly bigger question, which is, where should the Labour Party shift to? If it accepts it's in the wrong place, what does the local election result tell us and tell them, and how should it respond? Just listen to how Michael Gove, Lord Michael Gove, ex-Tory cabinet minister, analysed it this morning in terms of what they should and shouldn't do.
And then the idea that the Labour government's first response to losing Wigan and Wakefield and Barnsley to reform is to say, we're going for the European Union. We're going to revive a campaign to take us into the EU. I mean, honestly, if Labour believe that repeating the multiculti bromides of the first decades of this century and uniting behind a pro-EU message is going to save them, then the situation is even worse than it appears from these results.
But here's the thing, Anne, it's just not that simple as Michael makes out. Yes, seats and councils went from Labour to Reform, but votes didn't, and it's not quite clear what the easiest route back for Labour is. I actually got the political academic, our friend Rob Ford, professor from Manchester University, just to go through what he thinks the results actually suggest Labour could and should do.
Well, here's the problem. Labour lose seats to Reform. Seats are the currency of our elections. So if you are on the sort of in the Reform camp, you'll say, well, we have to win these seats. If we don't win these seats, there's no majority. That's a strong and persuasive case. But Labour's main vote loss, which is also confirmed incidentally in the polling data, is to the Greens. And there's lots of other data that suggests the voters that are going to the Greens are more open to coming back to Labour. So if you're Team Labour Green, you say, if we want to get from 15, 17% in the polls to 25%, 28% and be back at the races in terms of aggregate vote share, we have to coalesce that Green vote back because it's an easier win for us. These reform voters are really not keen to come back to us. And so we need to get back up a weight class, so to speak, now that Farage is a heavyweight. And the easiest way to put on electoral weight is to get those Green votes back. Now, here's the problem. Here's the dilemma. Both of those cases have a certain logic to them. Both of those cases can be made, but they're not, they are also mutually incompatible cases. That's what this election revealed. What they have tried to do for the past few years, Labour, is split the difference, be reformy enough, show enough leg to socially conservative Leave voters to keep them on board, but basically say to social liberals, you've kind of got to suck it up a little bit because we need a broad coalition. And what they've ended up with is the valley of electoral death. Go and take a look at the map of Greater Manchester, Sam, not just Wigan, not just Manchester, the whole of GM, the whole of Burnham's terrain. Look at 2024. It's a big red blob. Look at now. It's teal and yellow and green and just a few red spots. That's what happens if you alienate the voters who find the Greens appealing while failing at the same time to win over the voters who find reform appealing. You're nobody's first choice. So that status quo is a disaster.
So what do you make of that? It's not easy. It just needs good leadership in the end.
So what's really interesting about that and the fact that you put those two clips together there, I was sitting alongside Michael Gove on that panel, and it was just interesting in how certain he was that this was the wrong way to go. Any fool knows kind of tone that if you move closer to Europe when you've got a lot of the red wall, and we've seen in a mile part of the country in the northeast, it's still staggering to see Labour falling by the wayside there. Like Michael's view is then that's really, really crazy then to just sort of say, if we're make up a bit with the EU, that those people will not in some way be triggered to be more reformy than they already are, etc. Also in Wales and other key areas where reform have been surging. Then you've got Rob Ford saying, no, it's not as simple as that. And that seems to be the calculation for me, which is still weighing with most people around cabinet, or most people are thinking about the strategy, such as it is at the moment, which is that there's a better hope of building a progressive alliance, and that the one thing most progressives, whether they're Greens, whether they're Labour, whether they're Lib Dems, can agree with, or SNP in Scotland particularly, is that they sort of like to get a bit cosier with the EU. They don't like Britain being out in the cold, and that reform can't move or won't move that way. So you can see a bit of a battle here between an argument that's just cut through it like a knife and don't go against the id of a lot of the voters, and the other one that says, hang on a minute, you've said this a lot on this podcast and I've slightly taken it to heart. We are in 5 and more party politics, but in a first past the post system, maybe you can bring together that clump of the so-called progressive or pro-European vote more easily than you can fight reform.
Well, that is the question that Rob Ford poses. I just have another question, though, which is the Labour Party's got to decide this week whether or not it deals with Keir Starmer or not. But I was chatting to one person outside of politics in the last 24 hours, and they just said, if the Labour Party doesn't deal with the Keir Starmer question this week, they'll be unable to resist returning to it next week, next month. We'll still be here at Christmas. I think the danger is that we're all being sucked into a Labour psychodrama at a point where, if you're Rachel Reeves in the Treasury, you are getting the scariest numbers incoming. The Straits of Hormuz are still closed. The cost of oil and the cost of borrowing and the interest rates are all sky high. I think that mortgages are going to go back to being pretty unaffordable by the end of the year. Food inflation is going to be between 6 and 10%, and that the bonds between our politicians and the nation are going to fracture further, all at a point where Labour engages in a self-indulgent conversation about its own political fortunes for possibly months, and the problems of this nation do not get fixed. So fix it, don't fix it this week. But are our politicians fearful of a leisure centre moment in 3 years' time going to subject us to endless agonising and neuroticism for months? I'm not sure Britain could handle that, if I could be so blunt to all our political friends.
Oh, neurosis is nailed on. I mean, there are not enough therapists around in the Westminster area to cope with how contradictory, how upset, and how undecided Labour feels about what its future is, who it wants to appeal to, who's it for, and who should lead it. And one intriguing aspect of this was, what was the response? You can always tell the immediate response, the gut response of a leader at bay is, who do they then want to be photographed with? Who do they call? Who are you going to call? Not Ghostbusters, but Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown in different roles, but being called back, Sam, both at the age of 75, coincidentally, as perhaps one of the most odd but telling save our Keir manoeuvres. In the case of Gordon Brown, it's clearly to shore up the sense he's going to be an envoy for finance and to be able to sort of be another string to Rachel Reeves's bow. Of course, she's also a protege of Brown, so we have to assume that she's bought into that, though it does look a bit weird. And the one thing I can't imagine was Gordon Brown in his pompous chancellor saying, I'm going to have somebody else being a financial envoy around the world. And Harriet Harman, also a very enjoyable podcaster on politics at Sky. But one must say, bringing back Harriet Harman, many ways an icon, female advancement in the Labour Party, but to stitch together the violence against women and girls cross-departmental advisory role. I mean, really? I mean, that was not Harriet Harman's greatest strength. And it does feel very back to the future. But I think the reason that Keir Starmer is doing it, I don't know if you agree with this, I think he's, by putting those people there, it's a bit like saying, if you come from the king, you're going to have to go through these other people first, and you will be, I have called them back, and you will be dismissing them. Now, what's really interesting, they're not Tony Blair. He is going to come out, I think, with I'm pretty sure volcanic in some ways. I don't exactly know what he's going to say, but I think he's going to come out with some statement on the future of where Labour should go, or generally where progressive politics should go. Keir Starmer's made his choice. It's going to be the Brown option, not the Blair one. Although, oddly, for everything you said, if you wanted someone who is around in the Middle East, warts and all, with the record on Iraq, etc., not to everyone's taste, but the person who can actually go and make Straits of Hormuz conversations work in Qatar and UAE, etc., is probably more Blair than Brown.
The last time I looked, Tony Blair looked like he was most impressed by Shabana Mahmood. That's the events that they've done together, and just the evolution of Tony Blair's politics suggests that would potentially be his preferred option. As for Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown, just on giving Harriet Harman a role about women, let us just note, and we are still waiting for the government to set out its guidance in relation to the Supreme Court case about gender and sex. But she is a controversial figure in this space, and I saw that the appointment drew fire from J.K. Rowling, who again is at one end of the spectrum. But that is a signal in that space, I think, that some will like and some will not. But more generally, what do I make of Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown? This is a nonsense. This is an absolute nonsense. These are part-time, unpaid roles that allegedly report to the Prime Minister in the minutes that he'll have. They don't feed into active government policy-making work streams, as far as I can see. They are simple cosmetic moments for the purpose of a digital video on the day of pain. Pull the other one that this is the solution to anything. This is tokenism of its worst political sort, and the idea that they will play a substantial role in the direction of this government seems to me for the birds. So, I mean, I'm willing to be convinced if anybody can provide any evidence, but British government does not function by unpaid outside advisors being able to change the direction of policies. Just not how it happens. This is cosmetic at best. Not cosmetic, however, are the challenges to the union. Just listen to where we're about to head with Scotland. If you thought we were already in pain as a nation, listen to Stephen Flynn saying even though they didn't get an overall majority, what was about to happen?
Are you going to demand a fresh referendum?
I think it's perfectly reasonable based upon the result of the election, where, as you've quite rightly highlighted, we now have more pro-independence MSPs coming into Holyrood than ever before.
And then we've got the nationalists in Wales saying they want new powers. Great skill is going to be required, Anne, in political leadership to heal the divisions up and down the United Kingdom. And I don't think the challenges could be any bigger, just to tie everything up in this podcast. They really can't. And this is not a moment for navel-gazing for insecure Labour politicians, inexperienced in what happens when things get tough.
That was just a minute from Sam Coates on the wisdom of bringing back Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown without hesitation, repetition. But now tell us what you really think, Sam Coates. I suppose I'm having a little bit of an in fairness moment here, right? My annoying in fairness moment is I just think it's whether it's for the birds, doesn't work, etc., or it's just a week. I think it's a bit more than a weekend digital video. I think it is showing what Keir Starmer knows. And he's not always the most intuitive politician, but I think he knows in his guts that he has a very tenuous link to the Labour Party. He's not particularly loyal to him. We know he doesn't communicate that well. And so in the end, he's an Oban and St Pancras MP who was mainly spent his career as a lawyer and a prosecutor. And I think he's trying here to glue himself to Labour tradition to say, stick with me. I am part of the Labour story, warts and all. It's not really whether those jobs are significant or not. And about also, isn't he pointing to a direction of soft left accommodation? So in this appointments, whatever they may be worth. So I probably think they're slightly more significant than you do.
Well, maybe it'll temper some of the criticism from those two figures. That's the least it could do. Right, massive 24 hours ahead. We'll be back in the morning. God knows where we'll be, maybe still anticipating the speech, but that ticker of the number of MPs back in Catherine West is where we're going to be staring at for the next 36 hours. I can't wait to see where we are tomorrow morning.
And thanks to Politics for giving us such a lot of content.